Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Well, we are here in Orlando, Florida, where I've lived the previous 5 years before I did this little stint off to Guatemala. And we are here at Christner's Prime Steak and Lobster for the 100th episode of the Agents of Innovation podcast. And I'm here with an amazing guest that we're going to hear from today, Gerard Kelly. Gerard, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me.
Well, Gerard, before we get started, normally when I do these podcasts, I interview the guest, and then I go back and I pre-record an introduction to each episode. But I'm just doing that right now, so we just got right into the episode. And one thing I want to talk about is first, thank everybody who listens to the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thank all of the 100 guests that I've had on the podcast, because I know for people like you, you're super busy, you're running companies, you're flying all over the world, and I get a lot of people that, again, they spend their time to sit down and talk about some of the things that maybe they're not used to talking about so much, but a lot of people I think that are listening can learn from. And so we just, I just thank all of the guests that have done that. And, when I got the idea for the podcast, I was working for a think tank that was headquartered in Tallahassee at the time, the James Madison Institute. I was on the board of a charity music festival called Rock by the Sea. And, through both of those things and other social activities I've been involved with, I meet a lot of interesting people all the time. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs, philanthropists. I hear, I've met a lot of musicians, and the common theme was really, I see them all as entrepreneurs and innovators. And I would go to a lot of meetings, and I would come away from meetings or conversations with people thinking, wow, I wish more people could have heard that person's story. And, I must have said that a lot of times to myself over the years. And then one day, I was turning on a podcast, and I thought, actually, maybe I could start a podcast, and even if I just was recording the conversation, people could hear that person's story, and so it would be pretty interesting. So actually, what's funny is we're sitting here in December of 2021. It was actually 7 years ago this month, December of 2014, that I did that I said that to myself, I should start a podcast, and I reached out literally that day, maybe within that hour, and called my friend Isaac Morehouse. Isaac runs a company called Praxis at the time, and now runs another company called Crash. They basically, and Isaac had worked in a similar role as me, had done development for a nonprofit free market organization, and it was, then went off and decided, hey, I want to test this idea to see if young people who don't want to go to college would maybe, but still want to be an entrepreneur, would maybe, come on a program where they do an apprenticeship with an entrepreneur, right? So I knew that was his story. But I also know that Isaac's a man of a lot of ideas. He's one of those people you like, if you have a good idea, you bounce it off him. Picked up the phone and said, Isaac, what do you think about this idea of me having a podcast and interviewing some of these people? Oh, I think that's a great idea, Francisco. You should do it. And I'll connect you with someone that will help you with the technical aspects. Because this was 7 years ago. Now, like, everybody has a podcast. But I didn't really know what I was doing. Well, it took me like 3 or 4 months to actually get it going. By that time, I called Isaac back. And I said, hey, I talked about you being on my podcast. Why don't you be my first guest? And he agreed to do that, but also said, oh, by the way, I liked your idea about starting a podcast. I started one. What? So he already was like 10 episodes in, which told me something that I would learn from a lot of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people of action. They learn by doing, and they just do it, right? And so here I was, working as a development officer for a policy organization, nonprofit, and I had all these other things going on, so it wasn't like my first thing I wanted to go like spend all my time learning how to start a podcast. But I actually, by that time, I think it was April or so that we had of 2015, I had the first conversation on a podcast. That was a lot of learning for me to do, but we just did it. And I said, you're my friend, Isaac. If we screw up, we could probably just do this again, right? so anyway, we went with it. It was great. Also on that podcast, originally my first 2 episodes, my idea was, I'll have an entrepreneur on, and then I'll have a musician on, and then we'll have a song by that musician played, right? So I did that the first 2 episodes, and realized I was shortchanging both people, especially the musician. So I ended up changing the format to where we just have one guest. Sometimes it's a musician, sometimes it's an entrepreneur that's not a musician. But I came to really understand that these musicians were also entrepreneurs, and so like they have their own story as well. But I would play one of their songs at the end of the podcast. So the very first episode, I had Nick Gill on as well, my friend Nick Gill, who's from Alabama originally, but he lives in Nashville, Tennessee now. And he had been a musician. We had him on, I don't know, like 30 something episodes later, and he talked about also some of his acting he was doing. Now Nick is also in real estate, and he's still doing music and acting on the side. And I've had many great conversations with Nick over the years, but he agreed to be my first music guest, and we also played one of his songs at the end of the podcast. But the bigger thing Nick did for me was before I even recorded episode 1, he actually created theme music for my podcast, not even knowing what the podcast was going to be, just what I described it to be. So he came up with theme music for me, which I used for the first 30 episodes as part of the introductory music to the podcast. Then what was cool is about 30 episodes in, when I had Nick on again, I actually was staying with him in Nashville, and he has a little home studio, and he took me in his home studio, and we created new theme music for the Age of Innovation podcast together. And that was super cool because it also gave me an inside look into how music is created. Like, we created something together that didn't exist, a couple hours before. And actually, it took quite a while to create this like 30-second thing. So that was really neat. But I had Nick on that week. I had his roommate on, Jordy Searcy, who's been on, I think he's been on one of those, The Voice or whatever. And so we had a fantastic conversation again with both of those guys. And so just wanted to say thanks to Nick. But at the end of this episode, this episode will end with a song by Nick Gill. I figured, I was trying to think of which previous podcast guests I should use their music for this episode. And I thought, why not go back to the person who was the first musician, Nick Gill. And Nick's latest release, believe it or not, is a song called Afraid to Go. And this year, I took my own entrepreneurial venture, and after you listen to 20, 30, 50, 90, almost 100 entrepreneurs sitting across from you, you get inspired. And I think Gerard will inspire us today as well. But every time I would listen to one of these entrepreneurs, I thought, wow, like I wish I could be doing something entrepreneurial like that. And so just the inspiration continued to build in me. And this, a year and a half ago, just when COVID was starting and shutting down, gave me some time to think about what else I could be doing. And I hired my friend Carter Fowler to be to kind of lead me through some branding sessions. And by the end of the summer, we came up with a full concept for a community that would provide group coaching sessions led by some of the role models that I identified through the podcast. And I had about 50 of them that have come into the community as featured innovators. And so we do monthly group coaching sessions. We have a Book of the Month club where we have a featured innovator come on, and through a virtual event, they lead us through the conversation about that book. But also separately, every month we have the group coaching session on different topics. And also we started group trips. And so in this past fall, in November, we did our first group trip, and we did it to Guatemala, where I had been living almost all of 2021, and had a fantastic trip. And we're going to have another one April 2nd through the 9th, 2022. So if you want to go on that, go to fearlessjourneys.org, and you can check out the itinerary there and contact me, and hopefully join us on an amazing time. A full week in Guatemala. We'll be at Lake Atitlan, Antigua, and Guatemala City. So it's a great time. But I thought it was funny when I was looking at, what song of Nick's am I going to play? And it's called Afraid to Go. And I was like, that seems like the inverse of Fearless Journeys. So just a coincidence, but so we'll hear that song today. But anyway, check out everything about Fearless Journeys at fearlessjourneys.org. I also want to pause to thank my first sponsor of Fearless Journeys, and that is my friend Dan Lesniak. Dan and his wife Carrie Scholl have really the number one real estate selling team in the District, Maryland, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And that is, the Orange Line Living, but also he has the Hyper Fast Agent podcast and the Hyper Fast Agent coaching program. So be sure to check that out. I'll put all that in the show notes, but I want to thank Dan Lesniak. He's also now developing condo units in the DC area, so you can invest in some of those with him as well. But he's got a huge team up there, and also spends part of his time where he and I both grew up, actually, in South Florida. So But now we've got another amazing guest here. We're at episode 100, and I just can't believe that 7 years later here. And we're starting off kind of interesting because I think you could have been a great student for Isaac Morehouse's program, Praxis. Gerard Kelly is a dropout. He's a college dropout. University of Central Florida. Grew up in Orlando, but he also is huge in the video gaming industry. Now we're going to ask him if he dropped out because he was playing too many video games. We'll think about that. But also he's been involved in a lot of different projects. He's also done some broadcasting for esports for ESPN, and again he was the co-founder of NRG Esports. Had some really interesting co-founders with him and some other business partners, people like Andy Miller from the Sacramento Kings, Shaquille O'Neal, who's a former Orlando Magic basketball player, but has played for many NBA teams now. And anyway, so he's also just been involved in so many things. So a great innovator. I got to also meet Gerard in early 2021, just before I left for Guatemala. And our mutual friend, Mark Urbanacek. So I want to thank Mark for connecting us, introduced us, and I got to hang out with Gerard for a bit. And I actually went back to Mark the next day and said, Mark, I've been thinking about who's like the perfect guest for the 100th episode. And this guy is, I think, a big deal in everything he's been involved with, but I don't think he's well known, which is actually really interesting because most of the people on my podcast, they're kind of known in their own spheres, but they're not like hugely well known beyond that. It's not like I'm having Steve Jobs on the podcast, right? Or Bill Gates or something. So, but I think you're going to hear a lot more about Gerard Kelly. So Gerard, I want to re-welcome you back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. Sorry for my long monologue.
No worries. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your 100th episode.
Thank you. Well, Gerard, so tell me, one of the things I like to ask a lot of people on this podcast is what your first job in life was, and maybe what you learned from it. It could be anything like as a kid or whatever, what you learned from it, and maybe some things that still impact you today from that job.
Yeah, I had this job at my first job was at a movie theater. Basically doing everything, concessions, ushering, all that stuff. And it was like this mom and pop movie theater, and they were very, very involved. You would be cashing something out, and they would look over you while you're filling a bag of popcorn, and they did some really unorthodox things. Like I'm pretty sure they were restocking popcorn bags after people used them and stuff like that. But it was interesting just to see I don't know if you know anything about movie theaters. The business model's super, the margins are super thin. The money's made off of concessions and stuff like that, and the struggle that these people were going through, and like all the work that they had to put in to make this business that wasn't entirely in their control successful was really impressive on me. So yeah, it was I swept floors and did everything. I remember
and how old were you about?
14 probably.
Yeah.
14 then pushing into 15. So that was
okay, so then you moved on. Was this in Orlando, by the way?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, we won't name the theater
sure.
if you don't want to. But so then
it was in Deltona. So.
Oh, Deltona.
Yeah, I actually can't remember the name
Deltona,
of it. Right,
so probably one theater there, right? So
yeah, they had 3 screens, and it was 6 months after Indiana Jones came out, they get Indiana Jones kind of deal.
So for people that don't know the geography, Deltona's kind of between Orlando and Daytona. The best way to say it. Less than an hour from Orlando. But anyways, so you stuck in Central Florida for college. You started at University of Central Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go Knights, right?
Yeah, Go Knights. At the time, when I went there, it was not they were not a good football team.
By the way, what year did you enter?
2000.
2000. Okay,
yeah.
I'm a few years older than you because I actually started college in the fall of 1996.
Okay.
I
think it might have been actually 99.
Yeah.
That was when I.
Yeah, and then I was one of the. I was also a you can't finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so I went back. I ended up finishing at FAU, which some people say is find another university. But so
it's a funny story. My dad actually did the exact same thing.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So anyway, but you and I both didn't finish at UCF. But you okay? So what was your first of all, what did you go to there to study? What were you kind of interested in at first? And then why did you drop out?
Yeah, so I did like my associate's degree at Seminole. At the time, it was called Seminole Community College. Now it's, I think, Seminole State College or something. And transferred over there. Did, like my first full year there as an economics major. And, it wasn't like a Mark Zuckerberg, like I had this great idea, so I'm dropping out of college. No, I was just like a really bad kid. I partied too much. I got into all sorts of trouble, and eventually the school was just like, your grades suck and you're not coming back. And I was like, that's fine. Like, I'll go back to SEC and I'll improve my grades. And, life kind of happened. And so just kind of never went back. Actually, oddly, I'm taking classes there next semester for something totally unretated.
Oh, that's
like
interesting.
A personal project.
Well, so Gerard, obviously, later you got big in the gaming industry. Before we get all into that, what first piqued your interest in video games? I mean, did you play games as a kid?
Yeah, so my dad had worked for Siemens and Stromberg Carlson for, I think he's pushing 45 years now. And so we were like the first kids in our neighborhood to have like, the old Tandy computers and, so I was playing like DOS-based games and, kind of learning to program and, like basic and, really old languages that nobody uses anymore. And so I immediately got into video games. The game that kind of like really kicked it off for that, like was kind of a bonding moment for me and my dad was Warcraft. You probably know it as World of Warcraft, but the first iteration of that game was it's called an RTS game, real-time strategy. You have two people that, build resources or grab resources, build armies, try to kill each other. And
great game for kids.
My dad actually had really clever ideas on how to improve the game when I was a kid that later were implemented into different versions of Warcraft and what was later called Starcraft. And like the founders of those companies who I know and I've done work with, I remember like expounding upon them, like this game changed my outlook on all sorts of things. So Warcraft is really like the start of that, and it was a very old game ago. I would invite my friends over with like big CRT monitors, right? And you had to physically network your computers, and then we would play. After that came a game called Starcraft, and that's really where like you could argue that Starcraft was like the first really, really popular esport. And I kind of played in like the really low levels of their competitive scene. And so Warcraft, Starcraft, a Blizzard title, Mike Morhaime, like, my personal hero. He, like I said, he founded Blizzard Entertainment and was later acquired by Activision, the people who make Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's good. So what happened from getting kicked out of UCF? What was your path from there? What did you do next?
I kind of bounced around. I had tried to start a business. I don't remember, like, I think most everybody in here is from Florida. There was this very brief period where these, like, electronic sweepstake games, like, people would come in and play, like, what looked like slot machines, but they were really, like, a sweepstake system. It was kind of this gambling business. And I like took some friends and family's money to go start one of these businesses, and I made a killing. I just made a ton of cash, and it was an all cash business, and I spent it in the most useless ways possible, and ended up like I think my mom mortgaged like she had a house that she had, and I think she borrowed $60,000 against it. I don't think I paid her back on that $60,000 until I was in my 30s, and then I ended up having to buy the house. So I made a lot of cash at that business, but ended up losing everybody's money because of my irresponsibility. And so after that, I moved to Atlanta, where my best friend was. This is like right as like the heyday of World of Warcraft was happening. I was still doing competitions and stuff on the side, World of Warcraft really changed the awareness of video gaming and, really built a generation of video gamers that were, you hear these good comments about kids spending 16, 15 hours a day sitting at their computers playing video games. World of Warcraft started this. And there was even like smaller economies built around it. You had these Chinese, called them Chinese gold farmers, where a Chinese kid would be able to make, somewhat of a living by playing the video game and selling gold, like back to players who didn't want to spend the time, gathering gold. And so I got really into that. That game made and ruined friendships for me. The two guys that I moved up to Atlanta with, who were my two best friends, we played in the 3v3 arena circuit, and one of them actually still to this day does not talk to me. We played a composition called Rogue Mage Priest, and he was the priest, and he was just so bad that I ended up kicking him off the team. And we later went on to make Gladiator, which is like the highest, like the point, I think it's 0.03% of like the highest rated competitive in World of Warcraft. And I'd never had a fight with my best friend. His name is Ricky, until I started playing Warcraft. I actually like made out with his prom date, and we never had a fight over it. And then he threw a chair at me, like in a game of World of Warcraft. So I went up there. I ended up getting involved in a couple of small businesses. I owned a piece of a bar, and then like with my partner in that, we kind of went after other bars to kind of turn around their business and stuff. And that was right about the time that League of Legends started to become really popular.
Yeah. And
they created a competitive system called the LCS and the NALCS, the League Championship Series and the North American Challenger Series. These North American Challenger, the LCS teams were worth, at the time, we're talking, $300,000 to $500,000 without the business behind them. And so this buddy of mine that I played Warcraft with, his name is Mike Rosenwimmer, really close friend of mine. He came to me and he was like, hey, I know you've had a couple of successful businesses. He didn't know how unsuccessful some of my other businesses had been. And he was like, there is this industry in League of Legends where people are taking these North American Challenger Series teams and get they're promoting them into the LCS through the relegation system that Riot had. And he's like, I'd really like to do this, but I'd like your help to do it. And so I was like, okay. I think we both took 50, 75 grand or something, threw it in, like started hiring players, trying to figure it out. You had to qualify to get into the Challenger Series. You had to play in the Challenger Series, top out in the Challenger Series, and then play in the relegations in the LCS. And so we started doing that, and we were able to kind of flip some of these teams and make some money. It was an amazing experience. It was like the ground level of, like the bargain basement version of competitive video gaming as a business.
And this was sort of like in the kind of early to mid 2000s. Is that?
It was like 2010, 2012. Yeah. Okay. So it's actually even like the competitive scene really evolved. Even like they weren't worth money until even later than that.
Okay. So before we go any further into all this, because I'm sure if someone's watching this and they're they're a gamer or listening to this and they know. I mean, there's so many people that play these games, follow these games, all these things, right? But Gerard, like I grew up mostly in the 80s and 90s, right? And so video games in my mind are like, things like Atari, Sega, Nintendo, sure. Right? And then somewhere where, I don't know, I was in high school, I think like that was probably the last time I really played any video games of anything serious. It was like I had other things to do.
You were
with
serious
my
life.
Yeah. It's like, well, when I say serious, I mean like spending hours in front of a video console.
No. I lost my 4th and 5th grade to Mario. It came out, and I don't remember anything else but
my
Mario
parents had to take away, we had time limits on these things. And, my brother and I, who was 2 years younger than me, we played competitive junior tennis. And then it was also my dad going, okay, I think some of that is good for you, but some of that is draining your mind. So we need to get that out of here. So anyway, but some point, I think I just moved on, like graduate college, graduate high school, go to college, all these things. But I do know, a lot of college kids play video games and things like that. It just wasn't for me anymore. But then, I don't know, one day in the last few years, somewhere I woke up and discovered that there's this huge gaming industry, and it's not just kids playing video games in their, bedrooms. It's like a serious thing. There's obviously ways we could now play games with people around the world, right, simultaneously through the internet. But also there's competitions. You've done some broadcasting for ESPN, who's covered. So the other thing that really blew my mind, I don't know, a few years ago, learning that not only are people playing games seriously and competing and doing all these things, but people are watching people play video games. That's the way I would interpret it, video games. But it's accurate. Esports, right? All these things.
Well, it's not even just esports. It is people just playing video games. Like Twitch, for lack of a better word, invented that market, right?
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, what you've observed with video games going from, being developed in the 80s and 90s at the very primitive level, I guess you could say, and it probably before that, in arcades and things like that, to going to competition level and it becoming this huge industry where people are competing, people are watching. Like, how did that happen?
Yes, it was a natural progression, and it really all started with arcade games, right? People meeting at arcades to get high scores in Pac-Man. Todd and I's friend Jace Hall owns this company called Twin Galaxies, which is like the record keeper for high score video games. And that's kind of really where all that stuff started, and it kind of migrated from there. The accessibility of the internet, and then allowing people to play like non-centrally located, really opened up for the world of esports, right? Like esports couldn't exist without some guy in North America playing against some guy in South Korea who was infinitely better than he was, right? Before, you had Todd or, anybody sitting in an arcade and he was the best guy within a 5-block radius of the arcade. Now all of a sudden, you can jump into a Starcraft game with, somebody in another continent and you realize just how bad you really are. Everybody thinks, and even today, you hear all these, I talk to people anecdotally and like, I'm the best among my friends at COD, or, I'm really good at this. And I'm like, dude, like, if you were that good, I would know. Like, there's leaderboards and like the competitive industry.
And by the way, when we say esports, the video games are not just video games about sports. It is esport. It is now a sport.
It is electronic competition.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
It is video game competition. Is what esports stand for. Little e, if you publish it somewhere, everybody will like freak out on you. Otherwise, little e, little s. It is a word, not a proper
like
noun.
a little I in iPhone or iMac.
Yeah, but I don't know if the P in iPhone is capitalized. Nothing's capitalized in esports unless it's at the beginning of it. People like legit freak out.
Oh, I will watch that when I'm posting about this.
Yeah,
okay.
You'll lose all your credibility. But yeah, so that really it created a revolution, and it esports is more accessible than I try to use this analogy a lot. There's I'm sure everybody here is a sports fan or a basketball fan. The reality is you're never going to wind up in a pickup game at your, I used to play basketball in my elementary school, like after school. Shaq's never going to show up there and come dunk on you, right? You're never going to hit a baseball with Aaron. I wish I knew more sports personalities. A-Rod, right? But if you play enough video games, if you play enough networked games, Fortnite, League of Legends, there's 1,000 different games. You're going to wind up in a game with Ninja or Nadeshot or, somebody like Temper or, Reginald. So, like, the accessibility of that and, like, it creates a community where sports, like, isn't necessarily able to do that.
Yeah,
right?
What's interesting is I feel like in this whole world of social media we have and stuff now, too, it's a little bit like people can be a little more accessible. Like I can maybe tweet at a celebrity, and 9 out of 10, maybe 99 out of 100 times they're not going to tweet at me. But
occasionally
sometimes
you get the reply.
They will.
Yeah, sure.
You get a reply or something, or on Instagram or something, right? So that's kind of interesting how the internet has created a little bit more accessibility. Sometimes it's not in great ways, but it's in this example that's kind of cool. So tell me, you got into this. We heard your story about. Getting involved with these games with your friend in Atlanta, and how did you then go? My understanding is within this world that I'm a little more ignorant about, but you've got teams and competitions, and you owned some teams. How did you get to these stages where you got involved as a business person?
Sure.
Yeah.
When I realized that I was not good enough to be a real professional competitive player in any game. And I regularly get made fun of for how bad I am by, my other friends who are pro players. If I'm playing with like my other friends, like, oh, you're so good at this game. Like you can do these things that I can't do. And like, then I go play with my really good friends who do it for a living and I get dumped on. But when I realized that, like I wasn't going to be a pro player ever. And my friend Mike came to me and he was like, I'd like to try this. And I saw the, kind of the business model behind it. And we just kind of ran with it. It was something that I was doing on the side. I had some other businesses going. And it really just like kind of snowballed. And right about like at this time, like, Riot was, I think like they had something crazy, like 210 million active monthly users. Right. And so, and it was a free-to-play game, but they were making. I think they sold to Tencent for a couple $1 billion, like the first 50% of their company, and so VCs really started to like kind of look at the scene, and because of that, Riot and a handful of other games started talking about franchising out their esports leagues because they have the game as a business, right? It's a development studio, produces the game. Their job is to engage players, and then on the other side, they have their competitive scene, which is owned by the company and supported by the company, but not really regulated. At the time, there's no agents or, I think lots of professional players were getting paid a couple $100s a month. I think we paid, like on my Challenger Series team, we paid them a couple $100s a month and, put them in put 8 kids in a house to,
Wow.
And, made them play video games all day. And so right about that time, like I said, like venture capitalists were starting to look at, real investors. And that's when I kind of realized, I'm like, this is probably going to turn into a business. Now, there were people way earlier than me. You have Sam from Fnatic, Andy from TSM, Hector from Optic, these other like titans of industry, Adam Apicella. I mean, I could list 100 people who are, they were really, really early into the space. Richard Lewis and Sir Scoots, these people, and they, either saw the industry or saw like the benefit of business. I lucked out in League with the Challenger Series teams. We were able to flip a couple of teams, and we were going through one of the seasons, and we had relegated a couple of teams, and we got into the pro league relegation system. And I had beat out this other guy's team, and it turned out this other guy was Martin Shkreli. And I will preface with, I had no idea, and this is before he became infamous for the Daraprim stuff and all that stuff, but obviously way before he went to prison. But he was just some rich guy, worth a few $100 million, and, turns out he'd been playing League of Legends for years. And so he had kind of come and was like, how much would it take for you to drop everything else that you're doing and do this full time? What kind of budget would you need? Like normal business stuff, right? And so I said this, and, I think 2 days later, me and Mike were on a plane to LA, leaving what we were doing in the other sides of the country. And, we were making the push to make it into the LCS so that we could eventually capture a franchise league. We didn't know that that's not how the franchise teams were going to be given out anyways, but neither did anybody else. That's when everybody really started to get into the space. I think I was just a little bit older than a lot of people, so other business people just kind of thought that I was an easier fit. After the whole Martin Shkreli thing, and we actually lost that relegations that like we did not promote, and that was like happened to be right around the time that like the Daraprim stuff was going crazy, and Martin was being really stupid and nuts, and running his mouth to Senate and all this stuff, and he had to like he got, I don't want to say he got me sued, but his like some of the actions got me sued in that company. He had like signed a contract with somebody that I didn't know about, and actually they didn't sign a contract. There was a verbal agreement for him to do work, and
this was this with Team Imagine?
It's Team Imagine, yeah.
Okay.
So that like that went away. Martin stopped funding the company and went to prison. But there was a lot of other investment. There's a lot of other investors and VCs kind of circling the space. And so Mike and I kind of talked about it, and I was like, well, I'm going to take a chance on this. And I ended up going to this conference to speak at this. It was in San Francisco somewhere, and like it was an esports conference. And a friend of mine was like, "Hey, I'm meeting with this guy who he's looking to invest in the space, and he might invest in mine, but like, why don't you come to this meeting with me?" And so I did. I don't remember if we met together with him or if I ended up meeting separately, but it ended up being Andy Miller, and he was a owner of the Sacramento Kings, Quattro Wireless, which sold to Apple, and he was really talking to me, this guy Noah, who went on to go found another brand that's as big as NRG called the Immortals, and this guy Chris Badawi, who ended up like getting really pushed out of the space for some crazy stuff. So
Andy Miller, was he was Is it my understanding? Is he the guy that helped give Steve Jobs the idea about the App Store?
Yeah, so he had this company Quattro Wireless, which was like an advertising system.
Yeah.
And that combined with 100 other elements, I'm sure, kind of turned into how they monetized and created the App Store and all that stuff. I'm sure there's way better literature than I can explain on it.
Yeah.
But he's got
but these are the orbits you're running in now. Now you're running in orbits with people that you're co-founding. This is the beginning of NRG Esports.
Yeah, this is like how NRG formed. Like I said, I met Andy. We kind of talked, and he was also talking with Noah and a couple of other people, and I was also. I mean, there's a handful of other people. I hadn't met Rick Fox at that point, but I was interviewing with a handful of other people, and Andy's this guy, like he always said, like, I'm too early into everything. He's like, I was too early into the mobile ad space, so I sold it to Apple, right? He thought he was too early, and he's currently the CEO of NRG, right? There's been a couple of other interim CEOs, and he was co-CEO with Hector.
And you were the CEO at one point.
Yeah, initially.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so was that your first time being the CEO? I mean, other than running a bar or something like that?
Yeah,
of a company?
Outside of like what Team Imagine was, it was. And I had a couple of other successful businesses, and I made a little money. Had certainly lost a bunch of money. This was certainly like the biggest thing that I had done, and there was tons and tons of issues.
And tell the audience. I mean, some people maybe listening know a bunch about NRG, but tell the audience a little bit more about. I mean, the space that NRG occupies and the role that it plays in esports.
So it was founded at the same time as two other really large teams, the Immortals, like I was just saying, and then Rick Fox's team, Echo Fox. Like I actually pretty sure we were all like founded literally on the same day. Like if I remember correctly, like our incorporation papers all matched.
Was this because you were all at the same conference type thing?
No, we were all planning to compete in the next season of the League of Legends LCS. So we'd all kind of like put it together at the same time. I remember like all three of us went to our first owners meeting. I remember the first time I met Rick Fox, I was on I was such an idiot kid. But those like hoverboard things that they had? I was like running it around the Riot Studios. And I remember like everybody was like talking to this guy, and he's like how tall is Rick, Todd? Like 6'7". It's like 6'7". The guy's a monster, right?
Right.
And like I remember like rolling up to him and being like, "Hey, I'm Gerard," and he's like, "I am Rick," and like I was like, "Yeah," like like we were in the owners meeting together, and it was I think I was the first owner to have been like, "Hey, like congratulations," right?
Right.
And we developed a years-long friendship. So like NRG got a lot of traction because of so Andy Miller owned a piece of the Sacramento Kings, and so does Shaquille O'Neal. And so he, he was the outreach there to A-Rod and Shaq and eventually J-Lo and Marshawn Lynch and all these like just, really popular sports people. And so we became popular because of that. And then we did horribly in the LCS. Our first season was really good, and then the team fell apart. And I wasn't actively managing the LCS team, and because of a bunch of just internal drama and things like that.
Does it run a little bit like sports? I mean, where your team is more lucrative if they win? I mean, what you're
1,000%. Like if you look at, and there are people that could argue both ways, right? Like at the end of the day, like the monetization method is very similar, right? You're selling sponsorships, you're selling broadcast rights, and in the case of like the LCS teams, you actually didn't own the broadcast rights. Riot does, which is a super big complication, which is why franchising eventually became a thing. But if you look at like TSM, they're probably the most relevant League of Legends team, despite they for years they always won the North American the North American scene, like the LCS, along with Cloud9, and like those the teams that have a long history of winning have the higher valuations if you look at it. TSM probably being I would say the second largest, like from a cap perspective. I know FaZe just raised it like $1 billion, like $1 billion through a SPAC. But like FaZe is not just esports. Like FaZe is this brand. It's more than just video games. They have like LeBron James's kid as a member of their team, right? But like from a straight esports perspective, which is TSM, like they're probably like the largest market cap team.
Yeah. So having celebrities though, what role did people like Shaquille O'Neal, A-Rod? I mean, were they just investors? Were they participants? What was the role of having them there?
They were all advisors to the company, and like you could reach out to them if you needed to. Shaq was probably the most active. He at the same time that he was doing his, I think it's TBS or TNT, the show that he did with Rick and Charles Barkley.
Yeah.
Is it TNT?
Yeah, one of
TNT?
those. Yeah.
Thank you.
TNT, NBA on TNT or something.
Yeah. So at the same time, TNT launched this E-League, which is a competitive CSGO league. And Shaq really dove into it. And he was super thrilled about it. Rick one day was telling me, they were both on the same TV show together, and Shaq ran up to Rick, and Shaq was like, "Hey man, we're on the same team again. We're on the same team." And Rick's like, "No, you moron. We're on different teams. Like I own a team and you own a team, and we're gonna fight. Like that's how it's gonna go." And I think he called him a moron.
I wouldn't call a 7-foot guy a moron, but yeah.
He's so big. Like I met him the first time I met him. Was in, I think it was TwitchCon 2015, and it was the first TwitchCon, and it could have been this, I don't know, whichever one it was, and like I remember he grabbed one of my players, his name was Nairo, and like he picked him up and like kissed him on the top of the forehead, and you looked at him like his head and his whole body was just so big, you were like, and then like he shook my hand and gave me a hug, and it was just like. He was just massive, and I think like he like jabbed me, like he was like, "Hey, yeah, good job, man," and like it hurt. I was like, and at the time, I remember Andy, who was really close with him, was saying like, he's in the best shape of his life right now because all he does is work out and enjoy his life. He's not playing basketball. He's just an absolute like not just height, he's just big. He's just a massive individual. But he really dove into the esports side. He later was responsible for NRG getting the general car insurance sponsorship. Our Rocket League team has always been like the best Rocket League, one of the best Rocket League teams, and so it's their title sponsor. You call it is the general.
So you were with NRG, and then I understand at some point later you exited NRG, right? And
yeah.
And did you sell out part of your?
I sold out all of my shares.
All your shares.
And like kind of not at once, but I don't own any of NRG now. And it was right as like the Overwatch League was kind of coming around. I didn't have a whole ton of faith in the Overwatch League. It's just a weird league, fun game, but from a broadcast perspective, it's a very hard game to understand. Especially for somebody like I played the game from like the very early days of the game, and I play video games constantly, and I found it very hard to look at because you have like 6 guys on a screen, each with 4 different abilities, different colors, and it's like watching a Picasso painting or a Jackson Pollock painting, and in real time you're like, what is going on here? It's like somebody like you watching it just makes zero sense.
Right. Yeah.
And there was just a bunch of other opportunities, and it had just kind of, I was kind of like looking for something new to do. And disagreements when with my co-owners and stuff like that. So
did you stay in the gaming industry?
Yeah. So I sold that. I immediately went on. God, I'm trying to think of the first thing that I did. I met there's a handful of VCs trying to do things, and I kind of jumped on board to consult with them. And then I got really interested at that point in, this is right as like PUBG, if you play Unknown Battleground, still one of my favorite games, pre-Fortnite, not pre-Fortnite, but like before Fortnite became popular, before like it really blew up with Ninja. I got really interested in like the broadcast element of how people were digesting battle royales. And I ended up going to work with these people who were trying to create a gambling product, with this billionaire investor named Kerry Katz. He like made his money doing like student loan stuff, so probably super predatory. And he later became like a professional poker player. So we ended up building a studio out inside of the Aria Hotel, where he was simultaneously doing poker products and esports stuff. And we ended up like founding the World Series of Esports, which the name we ended up having to change because like World Series it's not the MLB that owns it; it's somebody else that owns it.
Oh, interesting.
And so like we just abbreviated it to WSOE, held a whole bunch of competitions. I moved on from that like as the early broadcasts were going on.
And then at what point I understand you did some college esports broadcasts. So now that esports has gotten so big, they have college esports.
Yeah. So collegiate esports is a huge thing now.
Is this for okay? Just to explain, is this collegiate esports? Is this for people in college, or is this just a league called collegiate esports?
No, it's for people in like
okay.
Colleges have programs where like they're esports clubs, or in some cases they're not clubs anymore. You know, they're ran by.
I feel super old. I feel like I was just in college recently, but I feel like super old now. You know, talking about.
I mean, we're about the same age, so I feel yeah. So like I said, like there are colleges now that have esports degrees and. Certifications and
apparently the college you dropped out of, UCF, is like one of the big gaming colleges now.
Yeah. Them in Full Sail, like just being right next to each other. Full Sail, I think Full Sail has like their whole own little arena thing. I've never been to it. I've talked to the people at Full Sail a handful of times. I had good relationships with people from Blizzard and Riot and a handful of other places. And when I was with WSOE. I was talking to the ESPN people there who ESPN's like their business is fascinating. Like they own all the production rights to the bowl games, but not necessarily the broadcast rights. And so I ended up going up to Charlotte to go meet with some of their executive staff and kind of pitch them this collegiate esports championship that ended up taking off. And we were doing a bunch of other productions at the same time, but it was this like a whole 12-week program, and then turned into like an hour TV show. We ended up doing like a big LAN event, which is like a live attended event at this like Comic-Con-esque convention called Comic-Palooza in Houston. I think it probably still has like the highest viewership metrics for any of like the college events on Twitch. It was put up for an Emmy. I don't think we won. I think.
You nominated for an Emmy. I mean, who would have thought in esports?
I mean, there's bunches of them now. I know people who have won Emmys for.
Okay. So I guess we've migrated in my mind from people play video games to people compete in video games to people watch people compete in video games to people broadcast to people who are watching people playing video games. Right?
Yes.
Is this all okay?
Yeah.
I don't know where this is going, Gerard.
Now with like the metaverse and web 3.0 or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah. Let's mention that, because I understand that part of what you're doing now is you're the co-founder, actively involved in a software simulation company called Havik, Havik, Havik.us. And you all make virtual reality training software for special operations soldiers.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved with that?
Sure.
I heard it's a crazy story.
It's absolutely nuts story. I'll have to leave some names out because it got really crazy. So one day I had this other person who I've done a bunch of business with. He's over at Activision, and he would regularly kind of throw me deal flow that he wasn't able to take advantage of because of his employment or something. And he said, "Hey, I met this guy. You've got to go down and meet him." And so I was in LA, and so me and Todd sitting over there. Todd, did you come? I can't remember. It was, oftentimes when you're with me, I just forget that you're there.
Yeah, by the way, I think I forgot to tell the audience. I mean, I mentioned that we're at Christner's Prime Steak and Lobster, but we also have some people here listening too. So, I wanted to do something special for the 100th episode, and so thank you for everybody that's came. So, your friend over here, Todd, who you're referencing.
Yeah.
So tell us about this Havik story.
Yeah. So we hop on a train and we go down to go meet this guy Brad Den in San Diego. And it's at some other VC firm's kind of office that he had met. And he pops open the HTC light stands, and he's got his whole VR headset. And this guy is a Navy SEAL that did a very specific job on a Navy SEAL on a SEAL team called a JTAC, a Joint Terminal Air Controller. And these are the guys who, from a couple hundred feet, call in a bomb strike in the middle of a battlefield to go blow up a building or blow up a dude, right?
Yeah.
And just the nicest guy with the best hair you've ever met in your entire life. And he went to university for for game development, right? And so this job in special operations, and like specifically he was on a SEAL team that do it. Green Berets have their own, and the Air Force has their own, is a very technical and complicated job. So it's very cerebral as opposed to, not that every job that a Navy SEAL does isn't cerebral, but his job isn't to kick in a door, right? His job is to make a difference on the battlefield by, blowing up moving tanks or buildings or something like that. And he goes on to explain how the training for this is done in a couple of different ways, which is very expensive or ineffective. One of which was this dome system, which was like a series of projectors where the guy went in and like used an Xbox controller to like call in bomb strikes. And this guy's still in the Navy at this point, right? Like in Navy Special Warfare as a SEAL. And he's like, the Navy allowed me to develop this in partnership with Lockheed, but the whole thing got shut down and like the code's useless and not usable like in any market or whatever. But now I'm able to do this outside as I'm transitioning out, and I'm starting a company to do this. I hear tons of pitches every day, right? For various different businesses in the technology space. I own a handful of other businesses. 99% of them, I'm like, okay, I'm nice. I give you your 15 minutes and, I kind of move on, or, I pass it off to somebody else, one of my other business partners who's more experienced in the particular field that I am. And he goes through and he explains how these Navy SEALs they're only able to deploy for very short amount of times compared to their regular teams because of the certification process. These guys are some of them are air traffic controllers. Some of them have these wild certifications, right? So they deploy, and a SEAL team deploys with the same group of guys over and over, right? But these guys have to kind of bounce in and bounce out. And he's like, so I developed this VR system that's going to be portable, that they can take to Afghanistan with them and train on it. And I was just super hyped. Like I said, you can ask Todd. I was super excited about it. Without due diligence, without anything, I wrote the guy a $500,000 check. And I was like, let's do this. I'm on board. Let's go do everything. And, we get back on a train, and I'm super excited. And I get home the next day or 2 or 3 days later, and I'm like, hey, can I get the corporate documents and all that stuff? And, just the stupid paperwork that nobody wants to pay attention to. And he sends it over to me, and I'm like, hey. I read it, and I'm like, oh, no. And it's like he doesn't control his company. Like the people who is this like VC firm built the entire structure to his company, all the formation documents, and he was really just a paper tiger CEO, and he didn't know. And this guy's a Navy SEAL. The guy's a fucking war hero, and he just he thought that the lawyer who brought him this paperwork was his attorney, and it wasn't. It was these guys' attorney, and. So I'm like, hey, two things. I give him a call, and I'm like, hey, Brad, couple things. I need you to give me my money back, which I'm happy to give back to you at some point, but I don't even think, you're legally allowed to accept this from me. And I explained to him the situation, and he's furious. He's like, no, that's not. And I'm like, look, dude, I'm going to go down the contract with you, and I'm going to show you this stuff. And so for weeks, I started going through it, and it all kind of culminated into this. He told the VC firm, who kept promising that they were going to put in money, but never did, but took a significant chunk of his money for it, and set up a meeting with me and them, and it was really hey, we're coming in here to arbitrate. This is unconscionable. This is not going to happen. And it turned into a screaming match. There was another guy from the special operations community that I was literally you need to shut up. You guys have stolen this company from him. And he's like, we haven't stolen the company, and we're people. I'm like, well, if you're people of your word, sign this document that says you're giving Brad his company back, because we're not leaving until you do. Otherwise, I'm bringing this to my other business partners. I'm going to start calling everybody else that I know about you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to mess your life up. This is ridiculous. And it ended up well. They kept trying to come back and say, pay us to get out of the company. We'll do this. And I was like, no. I'm like, just stay strong. I had to hire an attorney for him because weird, it was his company that he was going back and forth about. The reality is I should have never been involved in the conversation. If I was them, I'd have been like, get out of this office. Why are you even talking to these people? And So we ended up getting them out. Long story short, I know you're trying to. I'm probably talking too long about this. We ended up getting these things called Small Business Innovation Research Grants, and now the company is doing really well. We're delivering systems to SOCOM, and and we're developing new products, and probably the most exciting thing that I do.
So you mentioned earlier before the fact you shouldn't have been in the room because you weren't a shareholder.
Yeah.
That you didn't do your due diligence, right?
Yeah.
On this company, you were just. What was it? You were just so excited about what you saw in this, and you were just like, I want to invest.
Like the story of this guy, he's a Navy SEAL who did this JTAG job that prior to this went to school to be a video game developer. Like, you saw this guy's entire trajectory and what he wanted to do and what he wanted to be. And, like, it's impossible to stand in a room next to this guy and not believe in him.
And it wasn't that he was doing anything unethical. It was that he was.
He didn't know.
There was some finagling from him.
I feel like the law firm that they dealt with, like,
yeah.
Like we should have filed bar complaints, and I continually encouraged him to do so. Mm-hmm. And he was just like, I just want to move past it, which I totally respect. I'm way more spiteful than that. I would have totally handled it a different way. But they took advantage of him. They took advantage, and like I've heard other stories of them doing the same thing, and it happens. Like the VC world, like I can't say I haven't done similar things, right? Like it's just the nature of business. I've how contracts get signed and how things get structured. It's
so speaking of that, going back, you had some dealings with Mr. Martin
Shkreli.
Martin Shkreli, who's in prison. Through business, right? I mean, what would you advise people who might be listening who are either entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs on, first of all, having good principles and holding fast to them, but also being cautious in dealing with other people, maybe people you might partner with or invest with, and what kind of precautions maybe should they take when dealing with people? Because I mean, money comes along and it's enticing sometimes to get into some things, or great opportunities look great. Maybe what kind of diligence should people be doing?
Yeah, and so I coincidentally had this exact conversation with a nonprofit that I was connected to. I've kind of been on both ends of this, right? I've been, the guy who signed a bad contract because I didn't know any better, or I was presented a deal and at the surface level it looked great. And, when you get down in the weeds of things, it's not. I've also been the guy who is, torn apart somebody else's business to get what I needed out of it, right? Some of the best pieces of advice that I can give about it is take your time. Like every entrepreneur and especially with how this hustle culture of things is so predominant among young entrepreneurs, take your time, get to know somebody. There's no reason to rush into anything, really get to know somebody who you're going to sign a contract with. There's another contract that you sign and they're terrible contracts, or they can be, and they're called marriages. And that's what a lot of these corporate relationships are. Not that marriage is bad. I'm just saying, it's a contract, right?
Yeah, you're in it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And, oftentimes, when somebody comes to you, and again, I've done it, you say, this deal's on the table for 48 hours, or we have to execute on this immediately. In my experience, anything that has that sort of limited kind of window for success is not worth it to do, or is fake, or once you pull back the curtains on it, it's not, right? It's a sales tactic, it's a fleeting business idea. Really just get to know the people, and, hire an attorney. Always have an outside attorney. I don't care, if you're signing a real estate contract or whatever it is, the $500 or $1,000 that you're going to spend to have an attorney look at something provides a level of protection that you're just not going to get.
And probably make sure that attorney's pretty independent of the other party, right?
Don't ever let somebody come up and say this is your attorney, and attorneys sign these things called engagement agreements, right? They're pretty standard, but
Gerard, speaking of I mentioned tennis earlier. And what you were just talking about, I just watched I guess it's on HBO, the King Richard, about the Williams sisters and their father, and it's interesting because here's Venus Williams. This is part of their story. 15 years old, hasn't even played her first professional tennis match yet, has all the endorsement deals coming in. Nike is sitting right across from her, offering her $3 million before she even played her first tennis match, her professional tennis match. And here they are. I mean, a family who, just was in Compton not too long ago, 5 kids, all this struggling out, and this contract's presented, and they said, we're just going to wait. The family did. I couldn't believe this. And we know a little bit of the story. Now, they had some other deals that they had already taken up with some tennis coaches and things like that, so they were doing pretty well by that point. But $3 million, and then they offer her $5 million the next day, and she still says no. Well, 9 months later, Reebok came around and offered her $12 million. So 9 months, that was a pretty good return on investment.
Reebok shoes.
But it goes to your point, and that I really had a lot of more respect for that family when I watch this, but to be a little patient in some of these deals, right? Yeah. You don't have to rush into it. If everything's as good as you say or whatever, right?
Sure.
Things might pay
your
off.
Independent analysis of it, there's a lot to be said about gut feelings and gut reactions and like your own, your personal analysis of a situation, right? Anybody who's sitting on the other side of a contract from you, ultimately has their best interest in aim, in mind, right? That's not to be said. I get asked by people in the financial space a lot, or in the entrepreneurial space a lot. What other advice? And one of the core things that I always say is take risks. Like there's no real entrepreneur who hasn't and I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily describe myself as an entrepreneur necessarily, but I have leveraged my credit, my everything that I've owned, everything that my friends and family have owned to go do things. And, people who want to, lots of people have, real estate ambitions and things like that. And it's like, dude, go leverage your credit, right?
So speaking of that, Gerard, the name of my company here that I just started, Fearless Journeys. Yeah. One of the reasons I started that was because a lot of people have fear, anxiety. They're averse to risk, and yet one of the things I've seen with a lot of entrepreneurs, especially people I've interviewed on this podcast, is they seem like they're willing to take risks. They're willing to try. Many of them have failed many times in different things, and yet there's this mindset shift I think that people need. But what was it for you about just willing to just put it all on the table, take the risk, take the
I've had no kidding. I've had a lifetime of failure, right? And like I said, it started with university. I've been in every possible type of trouble you could possibly imagine, right? There was a point in my 20s when I think my credit score was 500 or something, right? And you realize that you're still alive, right? Failure is not the end, and you can always try to get back up, dust yourself off, and try to take a swing again. And I tell people, I'm like, what happens? Somebody wants to start a restaurant, or and restaurants are complicated businesses, or whatever the business is. I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? You go leverage your credit, you maybe borrow a little bit of money, whatever it is, and you go broke. You declare and I've never declared bankruptcy, mostly because it just seems like a complicated process, and I never had to go that far. But you declare bankruptcy, you can't get a car loan for a couple of years, big deal. It's a 7-year process at most, and the amount of things that you're going to accomplish in that 7 years anyways, it is quite possibly worth the risk. It's better than looking back and going, man, 7 years ago I could have owned this thing and I could have done this. I could have made this investment. I could have taken this risk here. And then you're sitting there being like, what could have been this? And that's worse than doing it and failing.
Yeah.
So, and my like I said, I have really failed at lots and lots of stuff. I mean, really catastrophically. When I sunk that gambling business, I think my dad wouldn't talk to me for a couple of months because I think I was like, yeah, I'm going to use your money for this, and then I lost it. My mom mortgaged a house. Like I said, I ended up buying the house, but.
So also when you're getting into businesses and you're starting some of these businesses, have you bootstrapped it? Have you taken family money, investors' money? Tell me all the different scenarios of that.
I've done it both ways. I've very much bootstrapped businesses and kind of built them to get off the ground. And even NRG was somewhat that. I think we raised $2 million initially to kind of get things off the ground. And Andy Miller's a very detail-oriented, intricate guy. And while he was like, spend the money to do this, spend it wisely, right? And despite his and I's disagreements and either of our flaws, he's an extremely intelligent guy and he taught me a lot. So I've done it both ways, and then in my some of the other current businesses, I watch Patrick Soon-Shiong, the current partner in one of these joint ventures that I have. He's doing world-changing stuff, right? He might possibly be the first person to get the first T-cell COVID vaccine on the market. He's testing it in Botswana right now. I think he's like the only doctor in the United States or maybe the world to have done like a pancreas transplant. He's the richest person in Los Angeles. I think at some point he owned some crazy like double-digit percentage of Zoom, right? And he does nothing small, right? He's a billionaire, it's kind of hard to calculate at that level of net worth. But he does nothing small. Like you go into a meeting with him and, we were talking about, this one event that we're going to do, or, he owns the LA Times, right? And the conversation goes from, this thing at the LA Times to, these virtual reality products that we're going to do to how this video game concept is going to solve a cancer problem. And just like money doesn't matter, right? It's more about, the positive change that it can do. So I've kind of done it on both ends.
Yeah. So Gerard, you've been around a bit. We talked about Orlando, Atlanta, LA. Where do you spend? Where has your life and your business ventures brought you in terms of places to live, places to see, and where do you spend a lot of your time?
All over the world. I've lived in Berlin. I've had a place in Shanghai. I guess lived is a vague term, but if I've never had like a residency visa or anything like that.
Right.
But
yeah. I lived in Guatemala this year.
Sure.
Yes.
Like when I go to Antarctica this year, I will have been on all 7 continents.
Wow. Whoa, you're going to Antarctica.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get back to that.
January 30th. So, LA and New York and all over the place. And I'm from here, so I kind of settled back into here.
Into Central Florida, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, we're glad to have you back in Central Florida. And also, I know you're involved in some other things, such as search and rescue. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved and what some of the cool things you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So, I told you the basketball player Rick Fox owned an esports team. I eventually got involved with them on the tail end of it to kind of help mediate some things and kind of.
And that's EcoFox?
EchoFox.
EchoFox.
Yeah.
Sorry. All to the esports people. Don't penalize me.
So I've always had pretty weird hobbies. I'm sitting here right now. I have a broken foot because I do some MMA training and kick somebody incorrectly. But I was at EchoFox one day, and like I said, like it's that whole EchoFox situation was crazy. It, just like everything else, it sounds like I talk about. And I met a guy
like MMA. Yeah.
Yeah. I met a guy who has done all this stuff, search and rescue stuff. He was like really an outdoors kind of guy. It's Todd. He's sitting right over there. And he was like, "Hey, I do all this stuff." And I'm like, "Man, that's awesome. And I want to try that. And I want to do that." And then as with anything else, it kind of, I look at the business opportunity there, and the philanthropic side of it, how can I spend my time, giving something, but possibly, also have it be a business. And we looked into disaster response management stuff and a whole ton of things. And as I've kind of, I'm older, I'm 40. I had a heart attack almost a year ago.
Wow.
And I really,
with all the things you're doing, I'd probably have a heart attack too.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy situation. I remember I was having back pain and I called my sister into my office and I'm like, "Hey, my back really hurts. I'm like, can you take a like that Theragun to my back?" And she doesn't. It gets real bad. And I ended up, long story short, I go to the hospital. I'm like, "Hey, I'm having back pain." The doctor's like, "No, idiot, you're having a massive heart attack." I'm like, "I came here for back pain, buddy. And I have things to do tomorrow morning. So can we get this? Can we get this on the road here?" And before the conversation was over, they had morphine in my arms, and spent a few days in the hospital. Best sleep I ever got. In the hospital for a few days.
Yeah, it was
totally
not the
healthy
last
now.
sleep you ever
They've
got.
taken me off of all my medication, and like I said, I'm I'm punching people 3 or 4 days a week and doing search and rescue stuff and any other hobby. We have this Todd and I found this charity called Crow. They
CROW.
CROW. They were like a ranger, like a conservation ranger organization, and so we're going to go to Italy probably in June and August to train with these guys, so that we can go to Africa and do some anti-poaching activities.
You don't know my friend Nathan Edmondson, do you?
I don't.
You got. I had him on this podcast, and you got to. He actually does this.
I would love to talk to him. Then. So
he's based in Utah now, but he was actually out in L.A. He was a comic book writer, and some of his comic books made it to the screen.
Oh wow!
But then he got involved in this.
It's
actually Eco Defense, Eco Defense, Eco Defense Group. But I forget the episode he was on, but it was a few years ago. And anyway, we're gonna have to pair you up because you guys, Nathan Edmonds, you'll have to.
I don't have like a job per se anymore, right? I have other people who thankfully run the companies that I have, and I found like one of the things that I learned as a business owner, as a friend, as whatever, like I've often found always let the experts do the things that they're experts at, right? I have a propensity for being able to bring people together and build a structure and then kind of let it move forward. And I've found that it's just better for my businesses and better for me to let like the people who are professionals do the professional stuff.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of free time. So things like search and rescue, the Crow organization, or really anything that I can morally get behind, that I can donate my time to, because I have I don't say I have a ton of it, but
so I was talking to Todd ahead of time, and he says you don't just get involved with this stuff. You're actually out there. You'll just take a 4x4 one day or something and just go out into the desert and find people.
That was Todd and I's first kind of thing. He was like, I'm like going out treasure hunting in this ghost town. I'm like, that's the weirdest shit I've ever heard of. Let's go. I'm in. And
you're treasure hunting.
Yeah, he was treasure hunting. He's like a nerd and he has a metal detector. I just wanted to go out and be away from people and go, like I said, like he told you earlier. I was like, hey, let me drive your Jeep up this hill, and he did. That's like, you're an idiot because I'm gonna wreck this. So just like I said, anything that I think that I can find that's fun, that I can morally get behind. There's the doing well or doing good while doing well kind of philosophy that I think that a lot of older business people take.
Yeah.
And I really subscribe to that. Like I said, I look at Pat Soong Shong, I look at some of my other business partners who are doing things to change the world. And I'll never do anything that big, right? I'm not going to invent the first T-cell vaccine, because I actually don't even know what a T-cell vaccine is. I just know that it's better or something. I actually don't even know if that's true. I just want to do good things.
So whether it's this gentleman who's creating the T-cell vaccine for COVID,
sure,
or whether it's Andy who helped develop what became the App Store,
sure,
in a sense, he was a little too early, I guess. But you've been in the room and been in business with a lot of amazing innovators. This is the Agents of Innovation podcast, so of course you're an agent of innovation yourself. But what have you learned from a lot of the innovative people that you've seen? I mean, what are some of the common characteristics that they embody that maybe somebody who's wanting to become an entrepreneur or become more innovative as an entrepreneur might employ? Yeah,
so I see several common traits among all of these people, but I think the difference is you have the people who have vision, and then you have the people who are able to execute on that vision, and those are oftentimes two separate qualities. You see it a lot in startups where the founder is the CEO of a company, and they have a very tight stranglehold over their business because they have the vision, but most of the times, the guy who's the visionary of the company doesn't need to be the guy running the day-to-day of the company.
Right.
The common trait that I've seen among truly successful people is just their ability to collaborate, their ability to be totally transparent and communicative. You don't see these super wealthy, super successful people going in and, preaching about things like they'll walk a room and they'll try to glean as much information out of everybody that they meet. The reality is everybody you meet has an experience you don't have, that knows something that you don't know. I always assume that everybody that I meet is smarter than I am. And it's for me personally, it sets a really good tone for the conversation, because then everybody knows that, I'm the dumbest guy in the room.
Well, they say if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, right?
Right. And so I've been fortunate or unfortunate or silly my entire life to have always been surrounded by people who are much more intelligent than I am, and I've been able to just continually learn from them. I look at our two, not you, Todd, other people. Two of his our friends, Rick Fox and this guy Jace Hall. They are constantly always trying new things and like really throwing something up against the wall to kind of see if it sticks. And then they don't let adversity face them, and they just like striving to be to have that kind of attitude is a difficult thing to have. And so but like I said, I think the core thing is, you never walk up to like these real innovators and industry changers. You're Elon Musk's. You're let's say Bill Gates. Although he's kind of at the end of his business career and is more philanthropically oriented. Or you talk to a Buffett or something. I don't know if you ever sat at one of his yearly the yearly Berkshire Hathaway recaps. These people, they always have a desire to learn, and they're not letting the arrogance of their success or their failures or, who they are kind of get in the way of that. It's a constant learning process and a constant improving thing. One of my business mentors, one of my very early business mentors, told me, and I'm going to screw these lines up, and I don't know if he got this from somewhere else. He said, once a person has their basic needs met, food, shelter, protection, everybody always wants to feel like they have the ability to grow. You're always learning something new, and then you always want to be able to impart that knowledge back to people and then give back to your community. And that's always really stuck. I've screwed that up. Like I said, I don't think I've ever done anything and not screwed it up. Some things have just really lucked out. Or I was too stupid for the failure of it to bother me. So yeah, that.
Well, Gerard, let's get to just a few last questions. I really thank you for your time, and but maybe a couple fun ones here for you. First of all, let's talk about Antarctica. What's going on there?
Yeah, so I think we were discussing.
You've been to all the other continents.
I've been to every other continent
at
some point in my life, mostly because of the video gaming stuff. There's annual tournaments in Australia, Europe, Asia, Korea. South Korea is kind of the mecca for video gaming, and so I belong to this. Club 33, if you've ever heard of it, it's a private Disney club. So I get access to some of these expedition tour things that they do. And they're kind of, the ideas in the next couple of years are going to close down tourism to Antarctica because of the shelf degradation that's happening. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I just explained that incorrectly. So it's my dad's birthday on January 30th this year.
Oh, cool.
He turns...
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday, Dad. He's turning 60-something. I'm not actually, I think he's 65 or something. And so we booked this tour to Antarctica. We'll go spend 10 days in Antarctica, seeing all the sightseeing stuff plus the research stuff that happens there. And
so Antarctica, which one is this? Is this the north?
Bottom one.
It's the south. It's the South Pole.
The whole thing's a globe.
I don't know. I don't know. And so how do you get there?
Yeah, so we're January 30th. We fly to Buenos Aires. We'll go
Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Yeah, they said it better than I did.
All right.
And then you take another flight to Ushuaia, which is kind of the lowest point in South America. We'll go down through Patagonia and Devil's Pass by boat, and then you boat down to Antarctica.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, the packing list was incredible. They're like, you bring this or you're going to freeze to death.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, see the penguins.
Right.
Well, anyway, that's cool, and I hope I get a chance to talk to you after that, so we can hear about Antarctica.
Sure.
But also, back to esports for a minute, because I actually consulted some friends who know you and know NRG Sports and just have all sorts of questions. But
good.
One of the things, one of my friends, I'll give a shout out to my friend Micah, who plays a lot of esports. He was asking. Apparently, there's a lot more talent in Korea and China. You mentioned Korea, and by talent, I assume these are the people playing the games. And what can we do to improve American talent?
Yeah, so the reason, and it's actually kind of shifting, right? If you look at who's winning the League of Legends World Championships now, the past couple of years, it's been China. South Korea had a real benefit in that they, at a very early point in gaming history, they kind of adopted it and kind of made it a part of their culture. It's an endemic piece of their culture. If you've ever been to South Korea, you can't walk around the corner with running into they're called PC bangs, right? It's just like a cyber cafe where kids come in and play all day. And And so it's been an endemic part of their culture for much longer than it's been in the United States, despite, America making most of the games. So it's a lot of it's a time thing, right? Like as video games become more acceptable, as parents look at their kids and realize, this kid playing video games 10 hours a day might find a career somewhere in video games, whether it's playing professionally or, eventually getting into the development side of things, or there's, huge businesses around video games. But a lot of it's a time. A lot of it's, how we approach coaching and things versus how, the Koreans or the Chinese kind of approach coaching. We have a huge problem, we bring players, we import them from South America, essentially, right? Get them actually
It's
get
like
them,
baseball, huh?
Yeah, you get them P1A visas. You actually get them professional sports visas to come over here and
Wow.
play for you. It's a huge mess, but they come over here and they don't do as well, right? Because we're so lax in our coaching and our practicing systems, and so
So we need better coaches.
we need better coaches. We need like the philosophy behind, like continuous improvement. We have these guys who look at, sports psychology or like, the Six Sigma of, like constant, constant improvement, iterative improvement rather. But it's going to take time. And you see it happening, right? Like even the Europeans were better than us. And now that's kind of leveling out. And it's also game specific, right? Like the Europeans are almost unequivocally better at everybody, including the Chinese and Koreans at first-person shooter games, the strategy games, the Koreans do better at.
So you talked a little bit about the culture, and that's kind of interesting because if you're a parent today in the United States and you see your kid playing video games,
Sure.
and you're like, okay, that's enough. But actually, this could be a career now. And, we were talking earlier here about, parents maybe that want to get their kids into music. Maybe it's playing the piano, whatever, because it can have a lot of adaptive abilities to so many other things. Maybe even be a musician, but you can learn. You could maybe be better in math and other things like that.
Sure.
I don't know if parents see that or if there's any correlations there with video games, but obviously people are making lots of money in the gaming industry. People are competing as players, all these things. So if you're a parent today and your son or daughter is getting into these games, what should you think? Should you be encouraging this? How should people be approaching it in the culture?
Yeah, I don't see a very good reason to not, encourage your kid, especially if they're enjoying it. There's super valuable skills that you learn from playing video games. There's problem solving skills that you learn. If you saw your kid, and we discussed this earlier, if you saw your kid playing the piano for 16 hours a day, you're not going to think much of it besides like, my kid's a prodigy. And if I was going to make a joke about it, I would say, how many wealthy piano players do you know versus wealthy video game players right now? I'm sure if you compared them side by side, there's a lot more people making money in video games than there are playing piano.
Yeah.
And if that's their goal is to make money, it's maybe something to look at.
Does it also help by playing the game? I don't know, on the other side of it, if it's coding or whatever it is.
Sure.
Does it also help people understand how to make games?
So I don't know if it intrinsically allows them to understand how games are made, right? That's a development and a programmatic thing, and I think that's almost a schooling problem. Like, I don't think they properly teach like the logic of programming in like lower than the college level. And I wish they did. Like, I think if every kid walked out of college understanding like the IFTT part of logic, right? If this, then that. I think the kids would be a lot better off. That's a whole conversation about education and schooling there. Like, there are programming boot camps that do better than kids with software development degrees in college.
So one of the things I like to also ask people, here is, advice you might give to other entrepreneurs. So if you want to be broad about that, go ahead. But also maybe if you want to be specific about advice you might give to somebody who wants to get into the gaming industry. First of all, what type of roles within the gaming industry they might pursue that are maybe there's some demand for or something. But anyway, what would be some of these steps that people might take to find themselves in that career?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of like these video gaming companies, even esports teams, they are businesses, and we need people with real skills outside of the ability to play a video game. We need the accountants, we need, people who can do marketing, who can do analysis. There's the sports side of it, where we need analysts and coaches and, all of that kind of infrastructure, player management. And then there's a business side. These are businesses, and lots of them are not profitable, right? Like, they're still, like, it's super cool to see these companies, hey, X company raised $60 million, in a Series F or something, right? Like, that probably means your company's not profitable. And so there's a real profitability question around a lot of these businesses, and, it's going to be the young people who understand the general culture of gaming who are going to answer those questions for us. Like, it's not going to be me, right? It's not going to be, a lot of the older leaders in the space that are really going to answer those questions. It's really going to be, a younger generation of people that are going to solve those problems for us.
Yeah, and by the way, I also understand that in the esports arena, I guess, there's a lot of, like, influencers who are getting on these games that I don't know if they're good at playing or not. Also, I know, like, political influencers like AOC, for example, has gotten into some of these games.
Yeah, she sucks at League, but
she sucks.
It's great that she's playing.
But, like, when these influencer type people get in there, I mean, is it for them to attract attention? I'm sure as a politician, she can't get paid to play. I don't know how that works.
Certainly not legal.
Right. Yeah. But if, like, maybe there was, like, some big influencer that was maybe being paid, is it helpful to the games? I mean, why are influencers getting involved in some of these?
Well, so it's mutually beneficial on both sides, right? Like, Ninja would not be as massively successful as he is without Fortnite, and Fortnite gets the visibility from him. Specifically then, Twitch or, YouTube or whatever, they have a monetization method of showing advertisements and things like that. So it's a whole ecosystem, and everybody needs each other. You need the guy to promote the business. You need the platform to be able to promote the business and the influencer. So
this is just a huge industry, gaming and everything, and you've been at the top of the rise of it for some time, Gerard. So it's been really a pleasure to have you on here. Can you just give us one last insight into this virtual reality? I mean, I know what you're doing with Havik and everything, but where is virtual reality going for everybody? I know we got the metaverse and all these things. Tell us what role that's going to play in our society.
I think in the future, and when I say the future, I don't know if it's a year or 10 years. Some of it's a technology problem. Our hardware hasn't caught up yet to do what we think it can do. I invested with one of my business partners a year of my time to look at this virtual reality system that we want to develop, and we just eventually decided the technology was not available today with what we want to do. We run into that problem every day with Havik, but it's going to become a way more integrated part of our lives. Just like how, cryptocurrency has taken over so many aspects of, not even just the financial market, right? You have, gaming, you have, there's just a million pieces to that web, 3.0 kind of environment. But you can expect over time for virtual reality to really become integrated. Bill Gates just made a statement about how, he hopes that VR can really replace, like, the need to be in an office while still providing people that sense of office community. Don't expect it to go away. While it hasn't had mass adoption yet, it's gonna. And if you're not able to catch up to it, you're not able to use it or understand it, like, you're going to be like your grandma who couldn't understand email 10 years ago.
Yeah. By the way, when we were on our Fearless Journeys group trip, one of the things that happens when you travel, right, you get into lots of great conversations, and we had a whole debate amongst us travelers about virtual reality and the role that it will play in travel, because you're going to Antarctica in January, but do you really need to go there if you could just put on a set of goggles or something and experience it like an augmented reality? So
the answer is yes, please. but there is a parallel to those experiences. Have you seen, like, the Van Gogh Museum virtual reality experience they do? It is amazing. Like, it is way cooler than looking at a Van Gogh painting, right? I've seen Starry Night up close, right? Walking into a virtual reality of Starry Night and just being able to walk through it is a different experience.
I think they had that in Orlando recently, right? I think they did.
I've seen it in like 3 different states.
Yeah. But it's actually funny. We were having this debate. I love traveling. I was like, there's no way you can replace the real travel experience with a set of goggles. But what's interesting,
but there's things you can do in VR that you can't do in real life either, right?
Yeah.
I can fly around the treetops in the rainforest instead of walking around them or doing a guided tour, producing a Ferngully game or something like that to to bring awareness to, like the environmental problems in the rainforest. And we actually intend to probably sell some NFTs to go buy rainforest property to stop it from being plowed down.
Yeah.
So there's things that nothing's going to replace the experience of going to the rainforest and feeling, smelling, and, being there, right? And even if we get to the haptics and, smell and feel of virtual reality, there's a difference between being there and experiencing it in virtual reality. It's not reality. There's things that you can do in virtual reality that you're never going to be able to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And those things need to be embraced as well.
Well, it's funny because in 2018, I went to Israel, and part of my trip, I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right? This is where it's on the site of where Jesus was crucified and also entombed, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of 2018, Marshall, who's here, I think you were with me in Washington, D.C., we went to the National Geographic Museum, and he had been to Israel a few years earlier. And we go, and they actually have the virtual reality experience of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You done that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I walked in, and I was just there like a few months earlier, and I put these things on, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I literally feel like I'm right back where I was a couple months ago." And now, what you said, like, I don't think there's anything that can replace the real experience. But I had the real experience, and then I had this virtual experience, and I was like, well, this is pretty close to being there that you can get. And we're at the very early stages of this, so I can't imagine in some years
where
from
it's
now.
going to go in 20 years, where technology is going to go in 20 years. I had the same experience with Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel. Like, they have a virtual reality version of it, and like I got a private tour. I was the only person in Yad Vashem. A private tour of Yad Vashem, and then I later went and did the virtual reality piece to it, and it was flabbergasting.
Yeah.
I was like, wow. Like I said, I literally walked through there with a tour guide, and I was the only person there, and in the virtual reality experience, I was like, I didn't notice this, or, I literally, because some guy went on top and photographed this statue that they had, I was able to come up and look down on top of it and say, oh, check out the cracks from, this weathered, this weathered statue over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So, like I said, there's things that you can do in reality, there's things that you can do in virtual reality, and you're going to need both of them to have, or there's a valued experience in both of them.
Yeah, well, one of the things, the class I've taught this last year on entrepreneurship and innovation, we constantly talk about change is something that is a constant, right? Change is always happening, but innovation doesn't necessarily happen. It needs people, and it needs people to collaborate and learn from each other and learn by doing and things like that. So
that's an important thing that I just want to make a statement about. So when we were doing research on this game that it's not a game, it was a thing that we decided not to pilot. We went and talked to NASA in Texas, and they take in all this grant money, and they do they trial and error all this research and development stuff that never makes it into production. Like, it doesn't matter that it never makes it into production. Like, we do it, we publish the findings on it, or we release the technology on it, and then hopefully it gets commercialized and people adopt it. Like, people look at the value of technology from a commercialization perspective, and that's oftentimes not where the innovation comes from. Commercialization certainly provides the need for something sometimes, but there are a lot of people pushing technology for the sake of pushing technology. Like, Elon Musk is a super good example of that, right? Like, he wants to put chips in people's head. He has the Boring Company. You can buy a flamethrower from him, and he's the reality of Tesla, of its value, right? They make their value by selling the environmental tokens of, for their cars they produce. Like, he's doing it to push the envelope. Now, he just happens to have created the most valuable automobile company in the world, but like, he's really driving that innovation. If he didn't do that, do you think GMC would say, hey, we're going to be fully electric by 3040 or whatever it is? No, of course not.
Yeah, he's driving it for the whole market. Yeah,
right, exactly. He's really innovating that space, and he's making everybody else come along with him.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few people here. Does anybody have any questions for Gerard? We just got a few minutes left here, if anyone's got anything.
You want to talk about Team Rubicon at all?
Yeah, so...
Team Rubicon.
Yeah, so it's a largely veteran-run organization that does... disaster resource management and search and rescue and things like that. Super cool organization. Check it out. It's entirely volunteer. And they do a lot of good. You don't have to be a veteran to get involved. You don't have to really do anything. They give you like a background check and you could take these classes and you can be sent off and, you can go to Kentucky and, go clear off the streets or go make sure that somebody can get back in their house by, clearing the downed tree in their house. It's super cool.
Yeah, so I mean, as we're recording this just a week or so ago, with those devastating tornadoes in Kentucky, and Team Rubicon's on the ground there, right?
They were, in every. So I've been to lots of disaster sites, and they are oftentimes there before FEMA even gets there.
Yeah. Well, Gerard, what's really amazing? We got a question for you from Michaela.
How do you balance your family life? How do you
Yeah, it's
So just to reiterate, since she wasn't on the mic here, I just want to make sure. Yeah, how do you balance all these things that you want to do when you have all sorts of things? Maybe it's family life or other priorities to do all these crazy things that Gerard's doing.
yeah, and
What is your priority list, or if you have one?
see, mine is probably much different for somebody that is, really looking to launch their new business. I'm not looking to launch a new business anymore, right? I've kind of been down that road, and there are more, not want to say more impactful things, but there are more meaningful things to me. But that is a super difficult question, and every day I'm crossed between that problem, right? I want to be able to spend time with my family and friends. I want to be able to do something good. I want to be able to make money. I just bought a business so that my sister and her husband can run it to, so they can have a, wealth of their own and also exercise. But you really just have to set that priority list and say, like, do I want this business or do I want to go donate my time? I know that I have a limited amount of time left with my mom, so this needs to be slid up there. And then find the ideas that you're really passionate about. And, most successful businesses are really about scale, right? So if you have a business or you have an idea, great partners, great business partners, people that you can hand stuff off. Like, I come up with an idea and I hand it off to Todd and he puts it on paper, and I hand that off to my buddy Nick, who, looks at the operations of it and handles it all. And, no man is an island, right? You're not doing anything by yourself.
You delegate duties.
That's before, I've put a lot of my time, 100% of my time into very specific things and ran every element of it. And that works, right? That's how NRG came to be. But now, it's a scale thing, and my interests aren't necessarily in this one neat idea, right? But as an entrepreneur, you're going to forever deal with that. Like, it's just a reality of the situation. And I think some of it's harmful, like this whole, you have to work 90 hours a week because of this, hustle culture kind of deal. I actually hate that. Like, if you're working 90 hours a week in your business, you've done something wrong. You're not delegating properly. You don't have the right team around you, and a real business, you should be able to walk away from for a given period of time, a month, and it should keep running, right? That's the operations side of this. Obviously, founding a company and starting a business, that may not be true, but
yeah. When you're founding and you're starting it, maybe it's just you. That's it. You're everything,
yeah, of
right?
course.
But then when you move on and you got to delegate, that's good. Any final questions from anybody? Marshall?
So one question that I would have for you is, and you kind of touched on this subtly a little bit earlier, but when somebody gets to a certain age, whether it's 35, 45, or 70, and they've been very successful, some people will decide to go on vacation for the rest of their lives and do nothing. Now, that is wonderful, and some people enjoy doing that, but others also continue to start businesses and branch out into new fields. Do you believe that that's the way to go as an entrepreneur who's been successful, to continue advancing in other fields and other businesses?
And yes, there is a valid, there's 100 ways to answer any question, right? I personally, and we didn't talk about it at all because I have no desire to talk about it. I have, done a 100% 180 in the environment that I'm going to spend my time in, moving into the near future. I had to go back to college to go accomplish some of these things because I needed some classes for a particular fellowship that I was attempting to do. But there are lots of people who are lifelong entrepreneurs that, they're able to put an idea together, build the company, move on, and go do that again. And if you have another idea, it's all personal preference. And, there are people who they want to do that. When they hit 40, they didn't have the heart attack epiphany that I had about how I want to spend the rest of my life. They already figured that out. I am the world's slowest learner. I'm still, this year I've made some of the dumbest mistakes in my life. And that's a huge accomplishment, because I've made some massive mistakes in my life. So it's all personal preference and how you want to spend your time.
Well, do we have any other questions? Suki, you got a question?
I was actually just curious about, so how many people exactly work with you, and for how long they've been working with you? And I was just curious about this.
So the different companies that I own have, varying amount of employees and lots of contractors. I have a fairly small group of people who have kind of collected along my way who who I really get my mind share of things with. Like Todd has been with me for a few years now. I have another guy, Nick, who's been with me for a long time now. And, I have a handful of other people that I'm common collaborators with. There's my business partner, Michael Holthouse. He's a oil guy in Texas, but one of the most interesting people you'd ever meet in your life. I have those kind of core people who, I really try to make sure that benefit along with me in the things that I achieve or don't achieve. Oftentimes when I start a new venture, I will give them shares of the company along with, obviously, money to work them or whatever. And I try to, encourage them to, for the most part, they run the companies is the reality, right? I'm able to put things in place, leverage my relationships, and kind of get the ball rolling, and then these people keep the ball moving. But that group is small, and that's mostly just because I've found that I have a super limited bandwidth for people interaction. I know I seem like a super outgoing person, but I get my battery just runs super low, super quick. So on any given day full of meetings and stuff like that, I oftentimes just cash out. I'm like, you know what? I'm canceling this meeting. I don't care. It's not good for me. I'm gonna go do something else. And I'll walk into the room with Todd and be like, hey, we're gonna go do something really dumb today. Let's go pack up our stuff and hit the road and go figure something out. Fun to do. But lots of employees. Only a couple that I really engage with on a normal level, and they probably all have to kind of bend to my needs, and not bend to that's a really bad way to say it. They all know how to deal with me. Todd knows my faults. My business partner Nick, who has made this year, like I said, he's made a lot of money this year, and he did it by really just kind of taking the initiative on a couple of these items and running with it, and then kind of really just coming back and saying, hey, look what I did, and this is how it is. But he knows how to deal with me. He knows when my attention span has been done or I'm not interested in something, but he knows that it's a good idea, right? Like I said, same with Todd, same with my sister even. My sister was a nurse, and she was just really not happy with her life. And a couple of years ago, I brought her on to bookkeep in one of my companies. Now she bookkeeps across all of my companies. She's now running a new business, and her husband works for one of those companies, and she's really just been able to she really knows how to deal with me. She knows. I think I knocked her 2 front teeth out when we were 10, and so she really knows how to deal with me. She knows who I am, and she really accepts any of my faults. And so a few people, but you have to touch a lot of different people and a lot of different things.
So first of all, your interview was amazing. It's always great to hear entrepreneurs. So this is actually a question from a friend who is in this industry or wants to get involved in this industry. And they want to know, what is your gift for networking? As you have talked throughout this whole podcast, what you have talked about is meeting these amazing people. And so as an entrepreneur, sometimes people don't necessarily know how to meet these people. Yeah. How do you end up with these connections? How do you meet the Rick Fox? What rooms are you in? What should they be doing? There's an elevator speech. What should they be doing to meet these people to then put them in these types of positions where you are?
So that is a phenomenal question. One of the people who own TSM, the esports team, Andy Din, kid's a decade younger than I am and worth $500 million or something crazy like that. He once told me, he said, the thing about you, and we met because of this, he's like, you can walk into a room not knowing somebody, and in an hour you will be at the upper echelon of that, of the circle of that room. He's like, you went and did this thing in Vegas, and all of a sudden you're having dinner with Bobby Baldwin, the guy who owns MGM, and like I said, Patrick Sung-Shong, one of the richest people in Los Angeles, I met through a third-hand resource and ended up now in business with him. And there was a point during COVID when it was me and 4 other people who were able to go to his house because he's a doctor, right? He was concerned about COVID, and I remember walking into his house and them literally spraying us down with antiseptic stuff to make sure we weren't passing COVID off. And I think it boils down to I'm too dumb for failure, right? For failure to bother me. And it's about taking risks. I don't and maybe it's a personal flaw. I don't weigh consequences properly, right? And I up until recently, like I never researched or like rehearsed, conversations or business plans. I mean, I obviously put together business plans, but I never rehearsed the conversation going into it. Like I didn't rehearse anything for this meeting because I have no freaking clue.
You have no idea how long it took me to get even any bit of background information.
He didn't get my background until last night at 9:45 because I was playing some League of Legends. I was like,
I met you one time 10 months ago, and maybe I need some more information.
But it's and I know we're running long, and I'm sorry, but
this is great.
It's you like I said, nobody's an island. Nobody accomplishes anything by themselves, no matter how smart they are, right? Like Elon Musk didn't make Tesla, right? He bought it. He invested in PayPal with a bunch of other people, and it's about maintaining relationships and helping people when you have the ability to help them. And I actually learned that at a very old age, right? The amount of bridges that I burned in my early businesses is just astronomically high because I was looking at the contract value of something or the monetary value of something, and once that was done, I was out of it. That happened in NRG. I really disagreed with everybody, and right or wrong, right? That doesn't matter. The bad taste that you leave in somebody's mouth will close a door. You have a bad relationship with somebody, they're going to say it, right? They're going to tell their friends. And that's happened to me on more than one occasion, and I learned, I also when I really started to value people, right? That really changed how I was able to open a lot of doors. People were able to say, hey, Gerard helped me in this situation. Brad, right? Brad belongs to this super small community of special operators. And yesterday I was on the phone with guys from SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. And, Brad vouches for me. And now I can call them hey, I need something. And, but the reality is everybody always wants a connection and always wants to help somebody, right? So you have to just make sure that you're helping somebody. So when you're prepared to ask them for help, they're going to help you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Great question, Michaela, and great answer. Yeah.
There's who is it? It was, oh my gosh, why am I brain friend? The comedian, my favorite comedian, Dave Chappelle. He said a line in his comedy stand-up the other day, and it was about a trans woman, and the argument's irrelevant.
You just got me canceled. All right.
But he said, hey, I'm having a human experience, and you got to understand that everybody's got a whole bunch of stuff going on. So if you can help them, if you can engage with their lives, they're going to be more inclined to help you, and that you're going to have a relationship with them. So I hope that doesn't. You can edit that out.
No, I'm just kidding. No, that was great. No, and that's totally true. Well, Gerard, I think we're gonna bring the plane in for a landing here. Not quite into Antarctica yet, but the slowest learner in the world. I heard you describe yourself as the slowest learner in the world. Maybe a lot of us just need to slow down because
I'm also super bad at that.
Yeah. So, and then you also said you're too dumb for failure to bother me.
Yeah.
So, you have some humility here, I think, too. And I think that is something with a lot of entrepreneurs that have a good sense of humility because also, we talked about, always learning from others, always observing from people in the room. And also, the one thing I heard there in some of your last couple answers to those questions where you're really interested in relationships with people, but also how to delegate to people within your business, and maybe that empowers some of the people, it empowers the companies. It also allows you to do a lot more things when you're able to teach others and delegate those things. So I just think that this has been a really great lesson for a lot of us in a lot of what we heard from you in your journey and your story. And you're only 41?
40.
40. I'm sorry, I don't want to advance you too yet. You're only 40 years old.
On top of the hill.
And you had some wake-up calls there that also made you think about maybe prioritizing some other things in life too. So I think that's great too. So I just want to say thank you. And if you have any last words, Gerard, for us or for our listeners or anything, feel free to throw them in there.
Yeah, I don't have any words of wisdom to impart. I think everything that I've said and everything you just said about me, I think if I listened to that on a regular basis, I would probably do a lot better as well. Everybody's always their biggest critic, and everybody gives advice better than receiving it. But I really appreciate you having me on here, and
well, I appreciate your time, Gerard. So Gerard Kelly, entrepreneur, innovator, gaming industry coach, commentator, broadcaster, Antarctic explorer. He's also search and rescue. We've heard a lot of things here. It's probably gone 2 hours or so now, but But it's been fantastic, and I thank everybody here in the room for coming to the 100th episode of the Agents of Innovation podcast. I think we did pretty well with our 100th guest. So thank you so much, Gerard.
Cool.
And we'll see you on the next series
101.
of Actually, I have a Guatemala series of podcasts coming up, so everybody can stay tuned for that. But for now, we'll just wait for the book to come out.
Cool.
That's all right. Thank you, Gerard.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.